Well, hello. No, I'm just kidding. Stop.
Okay. I'm gonna let him have his little moment there.
Everybody gets to see the best side of us because it's so early in the morning. This hair is wild. Okay, that's enough. I was just being funny.
I usually wrap my hair so it doesn't look terrible in the morning. But anyhow, it's been what, over 4 weeks, I think, since we last recorded. It's been a while.
Can't even tell you.
Yeah, we were in Virginia. It has been over 4 weeks because we've been in Florida now for about five. Last podcast, we left off that we were wanting to come here. We still didn't have a plan or a timeline on when we were. And shortly after that, we just decided that there was no sense in waiting around anymore. And we decided to wrap up everything we were doing in Virginia and head to Florida. So here we are. And we had some fun adventures on the way down with Alex having a back injury or re-injury and whatnot. And we've been now in like the outskirts of Orlando for over a month. Just mainly we came here for the weather. That was like number one. The secondly, because we want to sell the RV and we need to get some things fixed that are covered by insurance, but it typically takes many weeks, maybe sometimes even months. And we also recently decided that we don't want to wait around for that to happen. So we are leaving the country in about 2 weeks to our new destination, hopefully where we find and establish roots in our forever home. So right now the plan is we're already moved out of the RV, packed up everything, and we're staying in a hotel for the next 2 weeks. And the plan is to go park it at the shop and they're going to fix it. And whenever they do that, they'll call us. And if he has to fly in and move it or whatever, we'll figure that out. But for now, we're just taking it a day at a time, a week at a time, and the rest will fall into place like it always does. So that's a quick family update.
Yeah, she summed that up beautifully. I would just say that the last couple, like month and a half, has been pretty challenging for me, especially with the back injury. So it's good to.
He was having labor contractions essentially. Like after the third one, I was like, these are contractions. They're literally like with the flow of a contraction, like you feel it creeping on, it goes up and it peaks and then it falls back down, then you get a break and then you get another one. It was like literally contractions.
So ladies, I know what you're going through.
And I told him not even. I said, even though they were contractions, I said your whole body was not opening up. But regardless, he wasn't in a lot of pain, and we had to call the ambulance at like 2 a.m. because he thought he was dying. And inside, I was also laughing to myself because I know what that feels like. And I was like, geez, man. Because he kept calling me, like, help me, help me. And in my head, I was like, there is nothing I can do to help you get out of this. Like, you're in it. And that's so much what birth feels like. Like, I remember, the first birth, like, wanting someone to, like, take me out of the situation and help me. And then at the same time, I'm like, there's no way out. Like, I just got to have the baby. So that was fun.
I'm glad she enjoyed that because I didn't. And yeah, but I'm so extremely thankful because the boys, Grayson and Caden, have stepped up and helped a lot. And that's what family's about sometimes, even in like the hardest times.
Yeah.
We're all come together and help each other out and just keep pushing. And now we're going to Dominican Republic. Next week is Disney. This past week was Universal Studios. And
SeaWorld is going to happen somewhere in between all that.
yeah, SeaWorld was going to happen today, but
yeah.
We gotta.
Our schedule is just like, things are getting, happening, and we have a lot of meetings throughout the days and things we're doing, and it's hard to like squeeze in a whole free fun day. Also because once again we didn't like plan out our month. We're just kind of like, hey, let's see what happens, and literally from one day to the next we're like, let's go, let's buy the flights, let's do this. That's how we operate. And so far it's worked for us. So keep doing it. But as we promised in the last podcast, we want to start talking about the conscious leadership tools because that is what has changed the way we speak to each other, we communicate, our relationship, and many other things in our lives. I came by these tools a few years ago when I was at a retreat. It was introduced by one of the women that was hosting, and then later I went on to take a workshop by her to dive deeper into them. And I've always referred to them as part of my toolbox. Like I always keep them like they're like my first top five like tools. This is one of them. And I just want to, we're going to break it down because there's like, it's based on 15 commitments and there's a lot of information and like a lot of foundational work for it. But today I'm hoping that I can give you just like a recap and just solidify some things and give you guys prompts and things that you can still work with at home with your partner, like how to start having these conversations. And we were talking about this, right? Like, for instance, in our life, the way we've operated and the things we've done, the decisions we've made, you know, where do they come out of? And they very much come out of these 15 commitments, because the first commitment here is I commit to taking full responsibility for the circumstances of my life and my physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual well-being. I commit to support others to take full responsibility for their lives. So anytime that you are feeling like you're complaining or life isn't going the way you want or you're feeling down, these are the moments where I'm like, okay, we have to go back to the tools. Like, what do the tools teach? What do the tools say? How can we shift this? Because according to these tools, when we're in that mindset, we're below the line. And anything below the line, you're usually on what they call the drama triangle, where you can be a victim, a hero, or a villain. So a villain blames others or self. A hero seeks temporary relief, and a victim is at the effect of. And that could be your environment, of another person, anything. And it gives examples of what each one would sound like and what are also the emotions and feelings associated with each of these. So, for instance, I've read what above the line commitment number one sounds like. Below the line would sound like I commit to blaming others and myself for what is wrong in the world. I commit to be a victim, villain, or a hero and take more or less than 100% responsibility.
Can I just interject for a second and say that you mentioned about above the line, below the line, and I think that is a very the base fundamental, and I know that we talked about it in a previous podcast, but just want to reiterate that above the line is about being open, about being curious and committed to learning. And when we have that curiosity, which we'll get into, it's a totally different commitment, but when you have that curiosity, the change, the connection can happen. And when you are closed, when you're committed to being right and you're defensive, right, you're closed down. You're to yourself. You're not allowing yourself to be open to others to be able to create a connection. And I say this many times because I really do believe myself, and many people, all people, want connection. And so these tools, when I think about them in the first part of my relationship, not knowing them, I knew that I know in my heart that I wanted connection. But as many men and many people, when we are conditioned from the outside so much, we lose that connection with self. So I think that these tools have helped build this fundamental piece of connection with self so we can create that connection with others. And then also it goes back to, with this connection, it's not connection based off of fear. And I know for myself, when I look back to my childhood, a lot of the connection that I had was off of like fear and wanting to feel loved and all these other things. So like this is a good fundamental framework to build connection off of love and consciousness, right? So the big piece is to understand that above the line is about being open and being curious, and the below the line is about being defensive and closed-minded.
Yeah, it's all about awareness too. Like a lot of times we're doing these things and we're not even in awareness that that is what's happening. So these tools were a way of like bringing it all to the front and being like, look, this is what's going on and this is why you keep getting these results. And if you want to change the result, then you need to change what you're doing in your everyday life. For instance, the circumstances of our life, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual well-being, right? We were in a place a couple of years ago that neither of us were happy were what it was. And at the time, we didn't take responsibility for that. What we did was we blamed each other. So that, you argue, you fight, you this, it's you not doing this and it's you not doing that. And sometimes you do that to yourself, right? Like, oh, it's my fault that this is my fault. But that doesn't change anything. Like, you can sit there blaming yourself all day for the reasons that you don't have the house you want, or you're not in the job you want, or your children aren't turning out the way you want them to be, or whatever. Or you can just sit in it and say, you know what? This is reality. Now, what can I do to change it? What can I do to move forward? Or how can I just accept that it is what it is? And, these became so pivotal in my life and like in the forefront of my life when we went through the situation with our daughter, Linabelle, which we've spoken about many times, but she was diagnosed with a brain tumor right before she turned 3 years old. Um, and I mean, I spiraled for a few months. Like, I definitely had my bouts of being the victim, of being the hero, of being the villain. And then finally, when I had enough of that, I was like, okay, I need to pull myself out of this hole that I just dug myself in. And how do I do this? And I just began to see the whole situation differently. Like, what is it here to teach me? What am I here to learn? What could benefit us from this entire situation? And why would a child go through something like this?
Well,
And
that's not me this time.
oh, that's because I meant to turn off my phone and I forgot. But now it's off. But anyhow, being able to pull myself out of that, I really did rely on these tools and everything I had learned in these tools because I began to question, like you said, that curiosity aspect. When you start getting curious with things, you're able to shift. And the way I see it is like you're in a room and you're getting in a different place of the room to see the different perspectives of everything that's in there. Because if you're always standing in the same corner, you're only going to see that angle. You have no idea how it looks from any other side. So, like, get on the ceiling, get on the other corner, get on a chair. Like, how else does that room look to you? And that's really what this is about, is just being able to see situations from all perspectives versus the one that you feel stuck in. I don't know if you want.
Yeah, I want to say something that it definitely, this is what we did for us, and I've lately been seeing this a lot in the men's community on Facebook that I've been a part of, is that like for us, our marriage wasn't going the way that we both thought it would go, and I'm sure that we wanted it to go. But when we got to that point, we had, she was doing the work for a while. Like, we both had to jump on and do the work, right? Like, one person can't do it for both. You have to do it equally. And the first step of understanding of this process is like, what's your vision for yourself? What was her vision? And then you integrating those visions together. And there's other commitments and tools and things of that nature that we'll get into, but specifically having a vision for yourself and for your relationship, for your family. And part of that vision and getting into taking 100% responsibility for that. And also taking 100% responsibility for 50% of the relationship. So don't take more, just take your 100% of 50%. And I know that might sound a little confusing, but I think it's important that you have to identify how you're showing up and being responsible for that. So one big step for myself was understanding that I wasn't showing up in the relationship on spiritually, emotionally, mentally. Physically, I was.
Yeah.
I physically was there. I just wanted to make sure I didn't miss one. So thank you for that. And then having the curiosity and like she had said, it's it's big that we understand that the question is more important than the answer. You know, like being committed to the question and being willing to change the question if the question isn't the one that is giving you the clarity that you need. That's the most important thing. I just want to say that.
So what I really love about these tools, I'm looking at one of their worksheets here. If you're watching or not watching the YouTube, there's these worksheets I have, and you can find them on their website. So conscious.is, or Google the Conscious Leadership Group. And they have all these worksheets on under free resources. And I love this company too, because they want this work to be spread throughout the world. So they make their resources free, that if anyone takes a class or understands them, can always download them and use them and introduce them to people in their lives. You can coach with them. I've asked them, like, they say anybody can use the tools as long as you obviously reference them if you're using their work. But that's one thing I love. It's like, they're not here like, this is ours. You know, you got to pay us if you want to teach this. It's like, hey, please share this with the world. Like, teach this to everyone, because it's just so important. It's so life shifting. But I mentioned that to say there's a second worksheet that kind of goes jointly with the 15 commitments, and it's called the willingness questions. So for each commitment, they have a question that you typically want to ask to see if you're ready to shift. So a big thing about this work is you don't have to be above the line if you're not ready. Like, there are situations where he's like, you're below the line. And I'm like, and that's where I want to stay. And, you know, like, he can't do shit about it because I know I'm below the line, and he calls me out on it. And I'm like, and I'm going to stay right here below the line. I don't want to shift. But then when I'm ready, I'm like, okay, I'm ready to go above the line now. But a big part of this work is like, you don't need to force it. If you're not ready to shift in a situation, if it still feels too confronting, too, you know, whatever it is, like for me, like sometimes I just need time to process things myself and my emotions and my thoughts and my feelings, where he's like, let's hash this out right now. I'm like, no, I don't want to. Like, leave me alone. I want to figure this out internally. I'll hash it out with you when I feel ready to. And just understanding that everyone's different when it comes to that. Like, some people want to hash out certain things right away. And sometimes that's me. I'm like, no, we need to talk about this right now. And he's like, no, I don't want to. And that's okay. The point is that you still circle back to it eventually. You don't want to just put it away and forget about it or ignore it. You do want to eventually come back to it. So these willingness questions are a way to know, like, am I ready to talk about this? Am I ready to be curious? Am I ready to see the situation different? And if you don't have a full body yes, it's a no. And that's okay. Like, just one thing you can do is, if it's something big that you know has to change sooner than later, is asking yourself this throughout the day. And it's like asking that willingness question, like, am I ready to shift this? Am I ready to shift this? And until you get a yes. If you don't, like I said, it could take days, months, depending on the situation. It could be any amount of time. But for commitment number 1 specifically, the willingness question is, are you willing to take 100% responsibility, not more or less than 100% responsibility for this issue? So whatever the issue is, you would ask yourself that question, and you would sit there thinking outside of being a villain, someone who's like, it should be different, who's to blame, you're wrong, or the hero, I can handle it, I can help. For you, or the victim, it's hard, I have to, there's nothing I can do. Are you ready to get out of that mindset and then be responsible for whatever the situation is? And there's a third worksheet that goes with this one that's called 100% responsibility process. And it gives you instructions and steps 1 through 4 on how to unravel this. Like, how would you begin to talk about it, to get it out of your system, and then essentially find a resolution for it.
Yeah, so I don't know if you've caught on, but commitment number 1 is taking 100% responsibility.
Yes.
And some people call it radical responsibility. I think that's mentioned in the book, Radical Responsibility. And I think that it's important that we understand that the first two commitments, and we're only talking about the first one today, but the first two commitments are the fundamental, or the foundation, excuse me, of the conscious leadership framework. And the first two commitments is taking 100% responsibility and curiosity. And do you want to work through this right now? You want to like go through
I
this?
I was gonna just kind of read to give the examples. I mean, we can use an example if you want, or you can just talk about it.
Yeah, so I'd actually use this with the men that I coach, and talk to. So identify an issue, problem that's going on in your life, and speak about the issue in like the most dramatic or unenlightened terms. And blame. So one one I guess this exercise could also be, if you've ever heard, called the conscious scream, and you go in your car and you turn up the radio, and you're by yourself, and you just start letting you let out, if it's your spouse, if it's your kid, whoever it may be, you just start letting out, belting out whatever comes out, right? And so very similar. Let's is there
I
something?
mean, I think one thing that we can talk about once again that has everything to do with our journey is, for instance, a problem that we had was essentially your work life, the Navy, like that whole situation. Like he didn't like his work situation. He was already like done over it, but he kept doing it for a few more years even after that. And I didn't like it because he was gone all the time and he wasn't present, and he also did not have a work life balance. Like it was always work, and he was exhausted, and he would give more than he had to, or that most would even. Like here's the line to be a good leader, and he's like, I'm gonna go up 20 more notches. So that was, a big issue and problem we had. So if we were to speak about this in unenlightened terms, like you want to make it ugly, make it big, you want to be dramatic, because the point is to get everything up on the surface, like everything you've ever felt. And in this moment when this is happening, the other person's just listening. You're not responding to anything that this person says. So you're not looking to rebuttal. You're not looking to, fix it. You're just there as a listener. You're a wall, a fly on the wall, and you're just listening to this. So then step two, you would step into 100% responsibility. So physically find a place in the room that represents your commitment to being 100% responsible for the situation. That could be get on a table, get on a chair, like sit down, whatever it is, change your stance, put your hands on your hips, whatever makes you feel like you're coming fully into this responsibility aspect of it. You want to get into that position. Now for step number two.
Yeah, and then step three, I think is the biggest piece, and it's really thought-provoking questions or sentence stems. You want to complete the statements that they have on the sheet, and you can repeat them several times until you feel like oh, you know what, I've released this, or I'm living above the line. And so from the past, this reminds me of, and then finishing it. I keep this issue going by. What I get from keeping this issue going is the lifelong pattern I'm noticing is, and I can demonstrate 100% responsibility concerning the issue by. And this is just a tool and a mechanism to allow you to start to get these stories that you're creating in your head, because so often we are conditioned by our parents, and these stories that are created go in cycles, and if we don't get them out, the cycle is just continuing. And so oftentimes, and I can speak in our relationship, like I'm in my head and I'm thinking, and these stories are creating, and we're good, but the story that I'm creating in my head makes me feel like we're like a 2 or 3 in our marriage, and we're really like a 9, but that's not communicated. Like as people, as men specifically, we don't communicate often, and that's where the disconnect can come, because she's over here like, oh, we're good, and I'm sitting here, and these stories make me feel like we're not good.
So I'm going to use a example that I remember, that when I got to step number 3, that I keep this issue going by. A big issue I had early on in our marriage is that I didn't feel like he parented enough, or like he did enough around the house, right? So I would go around doing everything. And I'm saying this because many mothers have spoken to me complaining about the same exact thing. I do everything, my husband doesn't do anything, or, I'm the one that does everything around the house, blah, blah, blah. He just goes to work and all this stuff. And that one, I keep this issue going by, is huge. Is like, well, do you keep doing everything every day? Well, that's how you keep the issue going. So you can sit here blaming your spouse all day and saying, well, if I don't do it, then nobody will. Well, that's, trying to be the hero. I have to do it all. I need to help. I need to be the one to do it. And that is very much inside the drama triangle. And I was totally there where I was like, I need to do everything because if I don't do it, it's just not going to get done. He's not going to do it. Funny enough, the moment I decided to shift out of that, things started to change. It's like that is when things started to shift and things started to change. I was like, I'm just not going to do that anymore. And I'm not going to do this and I'm not going to do that. And he could do this. And when he's like, oh, laundry hasn't been done in a week. I'm like, yeah, you're right. It hasn't. Like, yeah, you're absolutely right. I'm glad you noticed. It hasn't been done. And he just looks at me like, what is going on? And then he would come home. It's like, are you not cooking dinner? No, I'm not. I'm like, there's food in the fridge though. You'd like to cook some. And it just, and granted, maybe at the time that wasn't the best way to go about it. Like some communication should happen, but that was like my way at the time of like saying, you know what, I'm not going to do all these things. Like you can start doing some of these things. Like I'm not going to do laundry every 2 days and I'm not going to have a cooked meal every day. Like you can come home and cook a meal too. And slowly like things did begin to shift, but obviously like, I'm not suggesting that anybody go about it the way I did. Um, Definitely communicate with your spouse and sit down, like have the conversation of like, hey, I am working on these things. I really want these to shift. Like, are you willing to join me on this journey? Like, let's do this together. Because at the time, like, I didn't have these tools when I started doing those things. But after I learned, I was like, yeah, maybe that wasn't the best way to just like not do these things.
Yeah, and in future podcasts, one of the commitments is communication. And so I know that those that are listening, that it's easier said than done. We know and we understand, and there's other tools that will help you have these clear communications with your partner or your spouse. And but where we're going with this is like in every situation, challenge that arises within relationships, whatever that may be, each person has responsibility in it. And we as people don't like to take responsibility because it's like pulling things towards us. We like to blame. And that's just the easy thing to do, and it's more comfortable that way. But when you take responsibility, you really can make breakthroughs. We've made breakthroughs by having that curiosity. And like even when she would do that in the past, at the time I'm like, are you serious? Like, yeah, you're not gonna cook. And there was some frustration at the time. But being able to clear that frustration and having the open mind and understanding that like seeing it in a different light. She's not, it's not that she doesn't love me, it's not that she doesn't care for me, it's the kids, so on and so forth. We engaged, we came into this partnership, and it's very important that you have a shared vision, that you talk about these things. And that's not communicated, or that's not how society tells you like relationships, should be. But now we're shifting, and it's all about choice and creating these contracts, right? And talking about those things.
I mean, it's like vows, right? Like who's the same 10 years after they get married, 20 years after they get married? And for us, like this is like a new start of this is the way we want to be from this point on. Like we don't have to be the people we've been the last 10 years that we've been together, over 10 years now that we've been together. Like we can be different people. And that's like a big thing that I speak to a lot of, these women who reach out to me and talk to me, is like, Have you sat down and created a vision with your husband? Because so many of them are like, oh, well, he's doing this, but that's not what I want him to do. I want him to do this, and this is what I want, but he doesn't. It's like, if you guys don't sit down and get on the same page, you're always going to be living in different books. Like, at some point, you guys have to sit down. And one thing that I love about these tools, and they talk about it, and this is like much later, but about win-win situations. There is no compromise when you're curious enough. When you get curious and you really sit down to unravel things, anything is possible. So everyone can win, not just one person. It's not like, well, she wants this and I want this, so we can't win. Like, somebody has to compromise. That's not necessarily true. That means that you're not giving it enough time to figure out how it's possible for all. And that's like been a big thing. And with us, is like when he's like, oh, well, I want this. And he's like, well, fine, I'll compromise. I'm like, no. We don't compromise in our relationship. I said, we don't do that. I said, so how can we both get what we want? I was like, I don't want to compromise anymore. Because I told him, I said, I don't think I would give you the same, leeway of like, okay, I'll compromise on that. Because I spent my whole life compromising and sacrificing. And I know what that feels like. And it doesn't feel good. It does not feel good to constantly compromise and sacrifice for XYZ, and I was like, I've been there and I've done that. And sometimes, once again, drama triangle, trying to be the hero, he's like, he knows that I've compromised and sacrificed a lot, for his career and this and that, and staying at home and raising the kids. And also, it's been a choice. And that's what I tell him. I'm like, I don't need you to rescue me from my motherhood, from my situation, from the choices I've made. Like, I take full responsibility for the choices I've made. And let's find a win-win solution for both of us, so we're both happy at the end of the day. Because if he then decides to cancel a meeting or not attend this or not attend that because, oh, well, I just want you to have a free day or I just want you to have free time, he's not going to feel good about that either. So it's also knowing that it goes both ways. This isn't like, well, I sacrificed all this, now it's his turn to sacrifice. It's not about that. No. Because that, once again, you're just going right back into the drama triangle of disaster. So
yeah, I also think it's important to see it from this light of compromise leads to resentment.
Yeah.
And resentment gets in the way of connection. And she used a big word. I say big word, but she used a word that is important, is like, it's a choice. So if you all agree and you come to that and you make the choice, like, you know what, okay, I'm gonna clear my schedule today and cancel my meetings and do this so you can have a free day. You're committed to the results of that, right? You're committed to the outcome of that because you made that choice. You're taking the responsibility. And I can say in the past when I've done that and I've had really good intentions, when it doesn't go the way that I thought it was going to go, I start to blame. Yeah. And it goes back into that because I fully wasn't committed to the choice, and I was more, and I wouldn't say laugh for a better term, but I was trying to people please, right? I was trying to, like, hey, like, you deserve this. Let me do this for you. But it comes back to that whole body yes, which will be another day. But compromise leads to resentment, in my opinion.
All right, so we don't want to make this too long. I was like, we want to make these nice and short so you guys are able to listen to these. And once again, we want to share this because it really has changed our relationship and the way we function. And if anybody wants more information on the tools, you can message Alex, you can message me. We also have a Gmail, Jessyl and Alex at gmail.com. I can't remember, it has underscores, so probably just Instagram ones.
We'll link that into the show notes. I don't remember the email.
Yeah. I know it has our names, but I can't remember if it has underscores or not. So probably just reach through Instagram or our personal Instagrams, either or. But just remember, commitment number 1 is taking 100% responsibility of whatever the situation is. And this is, just a little side note. These tools, I have heard them used in extreme situations, like not just like our situation in marriages and disagreements and things. I'm talking about like, rapes and things like that, where I've been able to hear women shift out of them. And you can find some of these videos on YouTube, things like that. Some in a book where I heard it was by Katie Byron, which funny enough, she actually contributes to a part of the work in this platform. She has her own thing that's called The Work, and it's a Judge Your Neighbor worksheet. But in her book, I think it's called Loving What Is, she's all about accepting and just being in the moment and presence. And I've heard so many stories in her book where I was like mind blown by the results of how she walked people through these situations to a point where they could take 100% responsibility for their part in a situation, even as, once again, rape, like that serious, where I was like, there's no way, like, there is a victim. And it's like, that's the drama triangle. How do you shift it above the line? So these tools, like I said, if you want more information, you can reach out to us. They have a book that's really great, and it makes it in a story form, sort of. So the tools are a little more easier to like take on. And then they do their own workshops through their website. And then there's all the free resources from their website too. So thanks for being here.